am Steve Swartz, and I am the, and I'm going to wander, and I shouldn't because of Mike's here. I'm the CIO at Fitchburg State University. And so I appreciate you guys coming out this morning. I know it's early. To compensate for the early wake up, I've had like 16 cups of coffee. So if I go too fast, just give me a wave and I'll slow down a little bit. Fitchburg State is located in north central Massachusetts. So if you've never been, we're on the other side of Worcester. See, I said that like a guy from Ohio, didn't I? Worcester! We're about 30 minutes north of there. We have about 5,500 students, of which 1,800 live in the dorms. And we have a very centralized IT department. So anything on our campus that gets purchased that is technology related first goes through my department. We have to sign off. Any type of support, to our detriment, we sometimes say anything with a plug, the IT department ends up supporting in one way or another. And so a couple years ago, we met, actually 4 years ago, we met as an IT department. And this is a time when it seemed like Motorola, rest in peace, was coming out with a different Android device seemingly every month. Lenovo was getting into it. There were a lot of different endpoint devices, and so my IT group met, and we spent about 2 hours talking about all of the challenges that we face as an IT organization in a university. And I'll tell you, I love it. I think it's the coolest job in the world, but it's also a very strange job, because if you think about it, IT-wise, we support a police department, all the way down to the laptops in their cruisers. We support several restaurants on campus. My department is in charge of the one-card ID for our campus, and we also use that as a debit card, and we do about $1.5 million a year in debit transactions on that card. So we support, in effect, we're kind of like a bank. We do finance groups, we do education, we do administration, and so I don't think in the realm of IT there's very many jobs in which you can have such a diverse and necessary supply of service to different, completely different groups. And so that's why I like higher ed. And so when we started talking about, and I will tell you, maybe we didn't talk so much as wine about our predicament and poor us in supporting all this, we actually came up with kind of 7 issues that we identified that were problematic for what we were doing at that time and what we saw was coming in the future. And so the first one, the influx of personal devices and bring your own device. So we've been a BYOD shop for about 3 years. Prior to that, we had a laptop that was a requirement that students would not buy. And so we spent months negotiating to try to come close to a price that Staples would offer the exact same equipment for. And we would ask all of our students to buy that make and model. And because all of them get a laptop for their graduation present, only about 18% were actually coming with that. And so about 3 years earlier, we decided let's just skip all of that, tell them we'll support anything they bring, and we're just going to bite the bullet. So we did that. Now for our faculty and staff, they get a choice between either a Mac or Windows laptop, if they're faculty. If they're staff, they get a choice between a Windows desktop or a Windows laptop, simply because of the applications that we run there. And we replace desktops every 4 years, and we replace laptops every 3 years. And so we looked at all of these different devices we were being asked to support. We got kind of scared. You know, how do you become an expert on every single device that comes out? And so that was one of the original issues. The second one, and this really started becoming a problem, is we would work all summer when no one is on campus re-imaging a lab, and we would get it perfect. It would be the best math lab you've ever seen in your life. And 2 days before classes start, the registrar would come up and say, well, we had a lower number for math, so we're going to put math over in that building over there, and this is now English. Can you redo all these computers 2 days before classes start? It's a problem. We had used a variety of different imaging solutions that would push software remotely. And invariably, they would work to a certain level of extent, and you still had to go out and test everything by hand. And you still had to go out honestly and do a couple of the systems because for whatever reason, they didn't get the image quite right. The third one is providing a consistent workstation experience. So we tried a number of different softwares that lock the computers. But no matter what we did, we still had on occasion instances where the professor before had screwed up the system for the professor after. And our classes are scheduled really tight. For better or for worse, we've been blessed with a large head count in Northwest Central Mass. And so we have very little time for a classroom to be down. There is never a classroom available that we could just move people into if something happens. And so how do we get it to where when a professor walks in 5 minutes before his class begins, we can guarantee that his workstation is going to do what it needs to do for him to teach the class? The fourth one kind of goes along with that. So when we talk about our classrooms being booked so tight, there is almost no time for downtime anymore. So if we have a podium system that goes down, even if I have the exact same system sitting on the shelf, I still need to turn it on. I need to produce some sort of an image and put on it. Then I need to carry it down and swap it out. And so that ends up being maybe a couple hours. And for our life, that translates into maybe 2 different classes being canceled because the podium's down. We can't afford that type of downtime. Number 5 is very similar to what I just talked about with consistency and how do we deliver software with 100% knowledge that it all got out there. It's a great example, right? New Office, Microsoft Office comes out. So we're an AD shop, we run Microsoft everything, and we use Microsoft tools to magically push it out across campus and fix everybody and give them the new version of Office. And you know what? We don't even bother coming in the next morning because everything's right and it's all good. You know, the reality is there's a huge percentage. You know, you look at Office, and Microsoft in their wisdom has made the thing, you know, the several gigs in size now, which is very difficult to push out across the network to hundreds of systems. But also, if you do that, does it really get out there perfectly for every single user across campus? And the answer is probably not. I mean, you do your best you can, but that's just the reality of pushing software. And so 5 was a big one for us. 6 was gravy. So what happens at our campus is right around the end of May, we have commencement. And as the last student walks across stage, you can hear the engines revving from the faculty as they peel away and go off to their homes for the summer. So we can't get them to test. You know, it's important. A lot of them change their software. It's very common for them to contact us and say, oh, you know that software I'm running, the version 5, well, there's a new version, version 6. Load that, make sure everything works perfectly. I'll see you the day before classes begin to test it. That's just not a recipe for success for us. So one of the things that we looked at was there something we could do so that faculty, when they're off-site, when they're at their homes or their vacation place, or wherever they're at, they could get onto the system in the summer, look at it exactly the way a student would see it in the lab. Same system, same performance, same setup, and tell us, yeah, that's good, or no, here's some changes I need to be made, so we can make those well before the semester begins. And finally, I threw number 7 in. It was absolutely the lowest point on the list, which was, if we're going to change things, is there some way we can reduce our waste and kind of make the whole process greener? You know, I tell you, we recycle our desktops every 4 years and our laptops every 3 years. So we're a state entity, right? We're in Massachusetts, which being a state entity in Massachusetts means there's a regulation for it. And so when we get rid of our desktops and our laptops, we actually have to enter them into inventory on the state website. Any other public entity can then request those items, and they get them for free. And after 2 weeks or a month, I forget what the exact time frame is, they are then sent off to be scrapped. Well, in the 6.5 years I've been at Fitchburg State, I think we've actually had someone take advantage of our 3-year-old laptops one time. It's a great idea, it's a great program, and just no one in the state takes advantage of it. And so the reality is, much of what we send down to the warehouse because we've refreshed it ends up either being recycled by an electronics firm or it ends up in a landfill somewhere. And so is there something we can do to improve that? And the other side is, to be honest with you, computers keep getting more and more powerful. They're sucking more and more electricity. You know, right now, if you look at your average desktop on your campuses, probably consumes about the same amount of electricity as a refrigerator does. That's a tremendous amount of electricity for something that honestly sits idle probably 16 hours a day. And so what can we do to make this whole system a little bit greener? And so when we looked at all of these 7 issues, we kept coming around to virtual desktops. And at the time, we were a VMware shop for our servers. We had a lot of virtualized servers. And we were also a Citrix shop for application delivery. And we looked at the 2 of them, and for us, VMware made a lot more sense. First of all, if you guys have ever VM'd a server, is it hard? Nope. Does it work? Yep. We really like that. Application virtualization through Citrix was just a lot more complicated, to be honest with you. And we're a small shop. So if you look at the numbers I gave you, we have about 5,500 students that we completely support. They can bring their laptop to us and say, this has Windows ME on it, and I'd like to upgrade it to Windows 7. Not only do we provide Windows 7 for free, but we do all the labor of the upgrade and bring it back to its state for them. And they get a loaner while we're doing that. We replace screens. We do every imaginable piece of work for a student laptop you can think of. And then on the faculty and staff side, we do the same. So we're somewhere around supporting 7,000 computers that we support, and we have 4 people in our help desk, 4 FTE technicians on our help desk. So we needed something that's going to allow us to spend our time focusing on all these other issues and not focusing on what's happening with the classroom systems. And so when we looked at, again, the differences between the 2 companies, VMware was simpler, it was proven, we were very comfortable with it. And so I contacted VMware and I said, we think you guys could solve a lot of these problems. In fact, they solved all 7, but we'd like to do a trial. And so I have an old server that we're getting ready to pull out of commission. We'd like a temporary license from you, and we'd like to run this. And what we chose was, we had about, I think it's 18 kiosks on campus. And they're basically, you go up to them, they're a Windows 7 desktop with a browser. And so, because most of our maps and our wayfaring on campus is all electronic, this was an attempt to get people who are just wandering around, they can quickly get on the web and do what they need to do and then cut out. And so we looked at those kiosk systems as being the easiest system we could possibly beta test with this. And at the time, they were running on a Microsoft Terminal server that had a memory leak. And so every 3 weeks, we would have to reboot the server. And so it worked fine, but it would slowly grind to a halt, and then we'd reboot it, and they'd be off and running for another 3 weeks. So VM asked us if we had worked with anybody else, or I'm sorry, with implementing VM. Had we worked with a vendor? And we said yes, and we worked with a vendor that was great with our server virtualization. And really for the next 2 months, they had a very failed project. And so at the end of 2 months, I had a system that kind of worked for about half a day and then would crash. And it was far worse than what we had left with terminal services. And so when we investigated VDI, we looked around for places that had done this already. And there weren't many of them. But one of them that had was Manchester by the Sea High School. Now, I'm from Ohio originally, don't know much, but Manchester by the Sea is apparently, that area is loaded, and they decided they were going to build a new high school, and so they raised a bunch of private funds, and the whole rule was, we're going to build a new high school in the football field, then we're going to tear down the old one and build a new football field, and nothing can come from one building to the other, even if it's brand new. You can't bring it, chalk can't come from one building to the other. So when they did this, their IT guy, and you really have one guy, looked at it and he said, there's no way I can keep up with all this. And so they did VDI in a big way. They took a whole high school. They ended up having one actual PC, and that was a laptop the principal used because he would fly often, and he wanted to have some accessibility to his work then. And so I just called him and I said, look, we've had a very failed implementation. It seemed to work fine for you guys. You know, who'd you use? And they had used a company that we had not dealt with out of Seabrook, New Hampshire called Focus. And so I called Focus, they came down. In 2 days, they took our existing system and had the kiosk up and running. And we tested it for about a month and a week. And it worked perfectly. No memory leaks, uptime was great, it was far faster, life was good. And so at that point, we decided we're going to dive into this. Summer's beginning, we order the VM hardware, and we start focusing on the systems that we want to replace and start on VDI right away, other than the kiosks. And we're going to talk a little bit about our solutions on this thing. And I will tell you, this is not this is a completely different skill set than what you had with server virtualization. And to be honest with you, and John can say more about it, it's a completely different skill set than what you've had for your desktop groups. This requires a different way of thinking, and it's a completely different technology. And so I don't think you are going to be very successful if you look at virtualizing desktops if you don't have good technical partners. You cannot do this alone. This is not something you buy the license key for and you just install and voila, we're up and running on virtual desktops. And so for us, I've already talked about focused technology being kind of a key implementer for us. They came in and did the work and set us up to where now we're at the end of 4 years with this technology. So we're now refreshing all of that back-end hardware we put in 4 years ago for this. And we had almost no downtime. We had one issue with the network switch at 2 a.m. on a Sunday that we had back up and running. Actually, John had back up and running at about 7 a.m. on a Sunday. And so that was a no harm, no foul because we were down and nobody knew it, but it was a network switch. We use Dell servers simply for cost. I don't care. We'll put anything in there. Dell seems to work well. Right now, they're beating the pants off everybody price-wise. And so our John will talk to you about what our new configuration looks like as we're refreshing this system, and that's all based off Dell. We're using NVIDIA Grid. So this has been the next paradigm in virtualized desktops that we've been able to provide. So when we started with this, and I'm going to let John talk about some of the caveats we found when we virtualize desktops, but there's certainly some things you can't do when you install VDI, or at least when you used to install VDI. And so we, this summer, dove heavy into the NVIDIA Grid K1 and K2 video cards and have, I think, achieved now a level where we can do anything with virtualized desktops. And I'll even talk to you about a little bit of the savings on this at the end. And then we use Samsung and Wise for our thin clients. And I think I've got a... So this is what our standard desktops look like right now. So this top one, this is this system. This is really indicative of what our podiums look like. And so this is just a good old HP monitor. I got a ton of them. They're 22 inches. We've always got them laying around from desktop refresh and stuff. And that monitor then, the back of it, there is a metal cage that houses a Wise P20 or P25. And I'm going to zip out of this and just show you what that looks like. I have to kill my camels. So when we went live with this, when I said we did our kiosk and life was good, the next set, when we went into production with the VMware system live, September 1, with kids coming in and classes filling, we probably, in hindsight, I don't want to say stupidly, but we chose the absolute most risky systems on campus to put this in because we chose our podiums. So I went to my president, this was probably the beginning of August, and I said, Bob, I'm convinced this is the way we need to go. I absolutely believe it's going to work for us. We've tested it, everything looks good, but now I want to go into our 110 classrooms and yank the podium system out and put these little boxes in, and I think it's going to work the first day of class, but if it doesn't, we've got a huge problem. And just credit, Bob was like, hey, if you tested it, it looks good, let's go with it. And so this is what we ended up putting in at the beginning. And we really like, this is a Wise P20. And we really like these. First of all, it's a zero client, so there's no OS embedded on it. I really like that because I buy these for the long run. I don't want a student, a faculty member, or God help us, a prospective student who's looking at our campus technology, walk up and see a Windows 7 desktop with an icon they have to click on in order to get to Windows 10 or Windows 12 or whatever's out at that point. These things are supposed to have a mean time between failure of about 12 years. They have no moving parts except this little on-off button right there. There's no fan in them even. So that little on-off button springs in and out, and that's about the only thing that can break on them. They take a very low power, and they're tiny. You saw them on the back. So we really like the other thing that I liked about the Wise is when we went live with these, we didn't tell anybody what we had done. So classes began, the instructors came in, and we never told them we changed anything. Zero training for our instructors. As far as they were concerned, there's one button on it. This thing, when it's plugged in, glows orange, like bad. When they push it, it glows green, like good. And they see a Windows 7 desktop come up. So for them, there was no training and there was no reason to train them. So going back, let me blow this up for you. So the other thin client that we like, and so the WISE series we found are really good because they, by default, mirror the primary display. So if you think about a podium, what I'm looking at on this screen, I want to be the same on that screen so I can see what you're seeing. And so the WISE are great on podiums. Okay? But then we started, actually we talked to Mass College of Pharmacy. Any of those guys here? So I was at a dinner meeting, we happened to talk about DM, and Mass College of Pharmacy said, you know, we looked at WISE for a while, now we're doing Samsungs. And so we started looking at the Samsungs, and the Samsung, this is a Samsung screen. Everything is completely built into the flat screen chassis on this. It's a all-in-one unit. It's kind of unique because right here, it's hard to see, this is an AC adapter that plugs in. They also have models where you can do power over Ethernet. So you really want to get neat. You know, you get those weird calls from like the football team and they say, oh, we want to put a computer out on the 50-yard line. And you think, well, geez, how am I going to get power? And how am I going to network it? Well, if you do these with the PoE option on it, you only got to run a network cable 300 feet and they've got power and networking, which is pretty slick. And we like the Samsungs better than the WISE for a standard lab space for a couple reasons. One, it's much cleaner if you see. There's just fewer cables because it's all built into the box. Number two, this display stand on it, actually you can lift up and down. And so it's got a lot of customization for different students. And the third reason why I like it is this unit in sum is about $100 less than the WISE. So I think right now on these we're paying $417, somewhere around there. And then you have to buy a keyboard and a mouse. And so we buy a Microsoft combo kit for $25 that we put on there. So that's the cost of our endpoint. And remember, this thing should last many, many years. At this point, whether it goes faster or slower depends on your back-end hardware, not what you put out in front of the student. So our first year we did the 16 kiosk systems. These are what they look like across campus. We ended up doing about 80 podium systems. We didn't do all of our podium systems because we had some that have smart boards and we elected not to go into that right away. And we also are a big Commedia university, so we have a lot of Macs classrooms. And of course we can't virtualize Macs. You can, but it's not licensable. And then we had a huge test lab of about 50 computers that sit there and we bring people in for acuplacer testing. Our nurses go in there and they do their online testing. And so we did those 50 test labs. We liked this so much that after the first month, we said, let's go ahead and we'll bring on 60 library systems, which was one lab in our library at the time. And then we started toying around with the idea of giving people a dedicated image and looking at doing staff desktops. So the beauty of this system is, again, your endpoint, once you get them out there, thin client-wise, they're good for you many, many years. You don't touch those again. You have to clean them, but that's about the only maintenance that you do on them. And then because they are thin clients, as you refresh the back end, which John will talk to you about here in a second, all the users suddenly get a faster computer and you didn't have to go out there and touch their endpoint device, which is really nice. And then I guess to go into this last thing, there's really two types of different desktops you can give people with virtual settings. You can give them a floating pool, which basically means it's a temporary computer. So if you go into our library and you log into one of those, it's a float. It brings up Windows 7. Across the background are all kinds of instructions about make sure you use a USB drive or save it to your J drive, because when you log off, this system will be wiped. So the advantage on those floating pools, and we do it for our podiums too, are you can't screw it up for the next guy. They sit down, they instantly have a new computer that's refreshed just for them. The second they close it, all their changes go away, and the next person has a nice new refreshed computer. The other side of it is the dedicated side, in which if you make a change, it stays there. So it acts like a traditional desktop. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to our VDI administrator, John Niles, and then I'll jump back up and then.
Good morning, everyone. As Steve said, I'm John Niles. I'm the VDI administrator at Fitchburg State University, also systems analyst. I've been there about 7 years overall, 5 years full-time. I'm really proud to be a Falcon. I've got a BS and an MBA from Fitchburg State, so it's great to be there. So I'm going to give a little background on kind of what Steve said, how we built our setup, what our setup is made of today, and where it's going, and where we've been. And as Steve said, there are some challenges, and kind of looking through my notes in past presentations from 3 years ago, I had some pain points. You don't want to do full screen video. You have a tough time doing persistence and dedicated stuff. Certain other challenges there that we've run into and tried to conquer. As Steve said, it is a bit different way of thinking with VDI. You need to do certain things. For example, software licensing, that was always easy. Physical machines, we put the software in that lab and it stayed in that lab. Now we had to kind of corral it and figure out how to deal with pools and things. And we're always available if you have questions about that kind of stuff. But with our first year setup, as Steve went through with the podium systems and such, we had 6 HP ProLine BL490 Generation 7s. Those are dual hexacore machines. So they were, at the time, pretty powerful in terms of CPU. I believe they have about 144 megs of RAM right now. So we started off with 4 in the desktop cluster just to run the end user VMs. And then we actually have 2 that run our server side of things, the back end, the connection brokers, the security servers, our vSphere server, things like that. Our original storage was an EMC VNX 5300, and as Steve said, we started off using the Wise P20 Zero clients. And then mid-year that year, just because we expanded into the library systems, we expanded the environment a little bit, we added 2 of the same additional servers. So now we're moving on a little bit, and another place that we said we probably could never virtualize was the computer science lab. But that next year, the second year, I dove in, I created a master image, I figured out how to capture and retain all the settings that the students and faculty needed for the compilers and the SDKs and things like that. And we actually did implement a small rollout of Profile Unity from Liquidware Labs to retain some of those settings and things. We also added a business lab, which was one that we had a little bit of trouble with software licensing, how to restrict it. So we ended up figuring out we could put these in kiosk mode with a single sign-on disable, which not only brings up a Windows desktop, so when you sit down it's right there, it also stops at the Control-Alt-Delete login screen so you can use your credentials and actually access your own network drives, things like that. So it really worked out well. And then we also did some print release stations and some staff desktops that were in a dedicated type of model. In the second year we had to add a little more because we added a lot more desktops. So we got 2 more of those HP BL490s. We installed a disk array enclosure and some more disk to increase the performance of our storage. And we started using those Samsung all-in-one NC220s. Now, kind of a background on why we needed more disk. And I think that's actually been one of the biggest pain points in VDI overall. It's not the storage aspect with the floating link clone pools necessarily, it's really the IOPS and the performance. So after we started adding all these desktops, we saw a little bit of latency, a little bit of slowdown in the logon, in the application opening, things like that. As soon as we added some more spindles, got some more IOPS in there, it improved dramatically. Login times were back down to where we wanted them, 25, 30 seconds at most. And the applications were snappy again. So it was kind of like giving a new desktop. So in the third year, we saw a little bit more slowdown with the logins, things like that. So we had an idea of adding some SSD into our array because in the VNX, we just had traditional spindles. They are 15K SAS drives, but they just weren't cutting it in terms of IOPS. So we looked at some solutions. We looked at adding SSD into the EMC. It was very, very expensive to do it in that particular array. So what we did, we actually got a standalone little Dell SSD SAN that has 15 SSDs in there, and what I do with those is I put the replica disc. Now, is anyone on VDI right now? Few people? Okay. I'm sure you've probably seen some of these pain points too. So when you're using link clones, you have a parent image, and then when you make this desktop pool, it creates a replica that all of those desktops now pull its Windows applications files from. So what we did was we actually put those replica disks on the SSDs, so there's basically unlimited IOPS when you've got the SSDs, and they're pulling all those similar files from the SSD. It really improved it. I mean, I went in the day after we installed it. I went into Steve's office, said, "Hey, Steve, our new storage is up. Here it is." He clicked in one of the desktops, clicked in some of the applications, Microsoft Word, and he's like, "Wow, that is pretty fast." So it was nice to see the improvement with the work we did there. This is also the time when I started thinking about the GPUs, because that was one of our biggest pain points. In the classrooms, when everyone wanted to try YouTube, any video, anything like that, it was jittery, it was stuttery if you went full screen. You could do boxed, but most people wanted a full screen presentation when they went in their classrooms. So I started looking out there, and I happened to find the NVIDIA Grid solutions, and I brought it to Steve and said, "Hey, this is up and coming, and something we may want to look at." He said, "Okay, get me a quote on a couple of the cards, get me a quote on a server that you would need to run it, and let's try it out." So this is about 1.5 years ago, actually. I installed one, just created a new test cluster, essentially, made a big image with all our graphic-intensive applications, Autodesk, SolidWorks, ArcGIS, things like that. Tested it out for quite a while. So in the spring semester, we had enough time, luckily, to really test it. And I had another guy that was testing with me, and we had very good luck with all of the applications that we wanted to do. We actually tried some video games. He was a big gamer. They worked well in one sense, that the graphics and the models were running well, but the biggest pain point there was the mouse. You actually had absolute or relative mouse, which is an option in the Windows client for VMware, but it is not an option currently in the Zero clients. So if you want to do gaming, and we do have a new gaming major, so it's something maybe in the future we'll look to do, but at the time, video gaming was not 100% quite there, just because of the mouse movements, essentially. And then in the third year, we did have a few more smaller lab deployments, and we're going through a lot of the full desktops and replacing those, just because of the advantages we can see. Yes?
How many Autodesk stations?
Currently, we have about 60 to 70 Autodesk.
Scale of 1 to 10, success, 10 being the best. I mean, how well do you
So far this year, we rolled them out in the fall, and I would say a 10. I mean, I've had very little
rendering
downtime.
going on there?
Absolutely, and that's. I was going to get into that a little bit down the road, but
We've got a slide on it,
All right,
I'll kick to it.
I'll talk a little bit more about that. So it may be even here. So this is a little bit more of what I did in the third year. I just optimized the server infrastructure because it had been in place for a while, so I bumped up some of the specs, some of the CPU and memory on our connection brokers and things like that. And then this is actually last fall when we installed, we got 3 more essentially. So I had the one Dell R720 with 2 NVIDIA K2 GPUs. We did install the Teradici Apex 2800 PCOIP offload cards. For those of you who are not familiar, the VMware to the Zero client uses PC over IP for its protocol, which is a bit better than RDP traditionally, because it actually will fill in all the pixels, and it appears to be a lot smoother, a lot better delivery for the end user. And then we also added some more disk array enclosures and disk to support these extra VMs. So we'll talk about the grid cards and hopefully touch upon your question here. So as we said a couple times already, VDI is limited unless it can handle better graphics and do a better job with not only video, but with rendering and other graphical models. We had the potential for new online classes in this case, because we could open it up and say, okay, you're a student in South Carolina. You may not have a system that can handle the full AutoCAD suite, Autodesk, Revit, things like that. but we can actually provide a link for you to get you the VMware client. If you click into that, you're going to have that same desktop that the students in the AutoCAD labs have. So it opens that potential there to not only offer new classes, but possibly even generate additional revenue for the university. Overall, it's a lower cost, and Steve will jump into that a little bit. And as Steve said earlier, we had the approval from faculty off campus. So our server setup for the fall semester we started last year in our iTech, industrial technology, with the AutoCAD labs, and we also did some in our geophysical sciences labs. We had 4 Dell R720 servers. Those are a little bit beefier than our HPs that we had. They have dual 12-core Intel Xeon processors, 256 gigs of RAM. They've got the dual NVIDIA K2 cards, the Teradici card, and we are using the VSGA model. Now, if you're not real familiar with the NVIDIA technology at this point, there's a couple different models. They started off with a dedicated model, which you actually pin a virtual desktop to a GPU. That isn't really feasible for us because you only have a limited amount of GPUs on the card. So that means a limited amount of desktops. If you really need to do hardcore rendering, that may be the way to go, but it's not as scalable as using the VSGA. So that's virtual shared graphics acceleration. And that's the model we're using in all of our labs right now. So you can actually take a single grid card and share it out to multiple virtual desktops. Your limitation there is basically the video RAM. So you need to size it based upon how much VRAM you need to give each of your models. There are 2 different cards, and I'll just give you a little bit of the specs on the cards. I don't have them in a slide, but this one we're speaking of is the K2 card. That is the higher end card. That has 2 high-end Kepler GPUs. It's got 8 gigs of GDDR5 RAM per card, and it uses a little bit of more power. It's about 225 watts. A little bit later on in the presentation, I'll show you what we're doing with the K1 cards, which is more of a density model, and we're going to be using those for more of our general pools. Those have 4 entry-level Kepler GPUs, so not quite as powerful on the GPU side as the K2s, but they have a little bit more VRAM. They have 16 gigs of VRAM per card, but it's DDR3 versus GDDR5, so it's a little bit slower. So here's some of the end result, and about the renderings. I did a ton of testing before we implemented it with rendering. I got files, mainly Revit and AutoCAD files from our iTech faculty that they wanted to try out. I did side-by-side comparison. We had Z400, HP Z400 workstations in the labs that we were refreshing. And essentially, they were rendering about 50% faster on the virtual machines, and they were rendering at a higher resolution. In the VMs, I had it rendering at 1920 by 1080. The old machines were on monitors. They were at the 1650 by, I'm sorry, I forget the second number, but the little bit lower resolution. So essentially, they were flying. In terms of rendering, and that also translated in not only rendering, but just using regular applications, full screen video, things like that. It was very impressive once we got through the testing.
You're rendering from your local data center or in the cloud?
Local data center. Yep, right from the VM itself, so it's using the K2 cards and the actual server GPUs. Yep. So some of the softwares we're running in industrial tech are the full Adobe suite, the Autodesk suite, ArchiCAD, and SolidWorks. We have a number of other things. Those are very big images, obviously, with the full suites. But it's been working well so far. In those labs, we moved to the new model of Samsung all-in-one Zero clients, which are the NC221s. There is a fairly important distinction here. The old NC220s and the P20s that Steve had shown is a Terra 1 chip. These are actually the newer Terra 2 chip, and what that does, it does improve performance by giving you a better frame rate. I believe the older style only supported a 30 FPS. These will do a 60, so your renderings and your video and things are a bit clearer on the newer models. And then we went into the geophysical science lab where we replaced 40 machines all at once. So on this particular cluster, we've got about 100, just over 100 virtual machines with the 4 servers. So we're running a density of 25 to 30 machines. The iTech machines are really beefy. Those have 8 gigs of regular RAM, 4 vCPUs, and they've got 512 megabytes of VRAM, which half is from the video card and half is from the server based on that shared model. The geophysical science desktops are a little less demanding. They've got 2 vCPUs, 3 gigs of RAM, and I'm running 256 megs of VRAM on those. And those are primarily running Google Earth, ArcGIS, and Envy, which are geographic information services softwares. We did have one bump last semester. It was actually related to storage with this lab, where one of our RAID groups, traditional spindles, was just getting hit too hard. So that's when we added one of the other extra DAEs and the additional disk that you saw as part of my upgrades there. But once we did that, the logins and everything improved dramatically. So those were the K2 cards that I spoke of, the little bit higher end GPUs. Now we're actually testing, and I put one in production just about 2 weeks ago, which is, as Steve said, our president and Steve are very supportive on risky propositions. Currently we have one server, so we have no failover, no nothing in this particular cluster, but we've had very little downtime with our existing infrastructure. We're fairly confident that we're going to have the same here. And if something does go wrong, I can just quickly shut this cluster down, go back to our old podium without the graphics acceleration. Pretty seamlessly, really. It would take a short amount of time. But so what we're doing here is we're hoping to get some video acceleration and better graphics for the whole campus now, because we're in our 4th year now of our VDI solution. So all of those HP servers that I spoke of earlier are going to go away. We're going to actually be replacing them with the same server configuration as our iTech stuff, the R720s with the 256 gigs of RAM, but we're going to do the K1 cards instead, because we don't need that huge rendering power, we don't need the huge VRAM power. What we want to do is just give the ability in classrooms to do that full screen video. So I set up one, I tested it over one of our breaks. With the K1, we have the dual K1 GPUs in there, and it's really actually going very well now. I put 65 or 70 machines into production. All of our podiums now are running off this server with the K1 cards, and all things are going well. I was in Florida for a while for the last couple weeks, so I haven't heard much, which is good. So I'm going to go back on Thursday to the office, and I'm going to check in on them a little bit more again, but everything looks to be great with those. So our plan is to add 5 more of those servers with the K1 cards and the PCIP cards, and actually transition all of our labs, all of our VMs over to that new style to give everyone a little bit more additional power. So here's actually what I'm talking about a little bit more. We're going to replace those, and over the summer, right now we're running vSphere 5.5, View 5.3, so I'm unable to take advantage of the new vGPU, which is something NVIDIA has come out with for all the virtualization technologies, which actually allows you to put a driver in the desktop versus in the hypervisor in the server. So right now with the shared model, we're actually using a video driver that sits in ESXi essentially, and it then schedules the GPU out to the desktop. So it's not been a problem that's worked very well for us, but once in a while on certain applications you'll see a little pop-up that says, hey, you don't have an authorized GPU installed, you better look into that. If you close that and you run the application, it runs fine, it just doesn't see the GPU as directly as a local card in a workstation. So the vGPU will actually install that driver at the desktop level, so I believe the application will be able to see it a little bit better. So once we upgrade to vSphere 6 and upgrade our Horizon to 6, we'll be able to take a look at that and try to take advantage of some of that. I think we may be able to use that in our iTech labs where the density is lower, but where we're looking for higher density in our other cluster, I don't know if we're going to be able to take advantage of it because it does reduce the amount of desktops you can get on each GPU essentially. And then next year we're actually doing a big storage migration. So we've got a lot of things going on this year, especially with the hardware refresh, the upgrades, things like that. So I'll let Steve take over a little bit and go into some of the cost.
Yeah, so, you know, I hear a lot from people that going to virtualized desktops is very expensive. And guaranteed, the first time you do this, you're going to pay more per workstation than if you just went out and bought a little small form factor HP and dumped it on somebody's desk. But there are some tremendous savings in virtual desktop too. And they really come right along your first refresh cycle. So I'll give you a couple examples of this. You know, when we look at what we would be replacing those systems with a traditional HP Z400 workstation class machine, you're looking at about $276,000 to do that. When we did the servers that we bought with the grid cards, put them in place into production, our total on that was about $125,000. So we saved $150,000 right there. Desktop for desktop, we saved $150,000 going with the thin client. But here's the trick. Remember the thin clients. These little things almost run off a 9-volt battery. If you look at power consumption per year, we're a state institution. I'm almost guaranteed to buy electricity cheaper than any private institution can even touch because the whole Commonwealth buys in one package. When we look at our cost for electricity, we're saving about $21,000 a year just in these 100 workstations that we've put out there. So that's every year. Now, does my facilities guy give me a credit back to the IT account for his? No. But we are saving and we're doing something good, and so that meets that green number 7 standard that I mentioned. The other thing to think about on this is we're just going to play rough math here. So let's say you guys do a desktop. I've got 600 of these virtualized desktops out there. And this summer, we're refreshing those, and it's going to cost us somewhere around $150,000 to replace all those servers on the back end. Okay? So if you do 600 systems, what's an average desktop cost now? Go low, $600. If you did 600, you're talking $360,000 to replace those 600 desktops, and we're going to do it for $150,000. And you know what else we're not going to do? I'm never going to go outside my little IT area. I can sit like a little gopher in my hole and look at the blinking lights because it's all on the back end. They already have the thin client, so other than cleaning them, I don't go out and change anything on them. So think about your staff time that you save. You know, I would say VDI is the greatest soft cost solution that there is. No one cares that you have to send your techs out to the field to do break fix, 20 times a week on different systems. When you go to VDI, all of that goes away. If you look at our library, we never have one but the little sign on the screen that says, this system is broken. We are working on it. So there's some definite cost savings on there. And finally, I would like to say, and I started this by saying, of course, this is a partnership and we'll get some questions, but there's some key people in this room. One of which is Jeff, and I'm giving you the contact information. And Jeff's right up here. Jeff is our NVIDIA Grid technical guru. So Jeff actually worked with us to get us some K cards so that we could try them out before we bought them. And he knows everything there is to know about the NVIDIA line. And then Kelly and Toby are here.
I'm right here.
Kelly and Toby's in the back. And they're both with Focus. So if you have some general questions about VDI or VMware, or you're looking at doing some sort of a pilot, you kind of want to hit them up before you leave the room. And with that, I would say we can take any questions you have.
What about securing those systems? If they're so small and so easily movable?
Yeah, so the cage that you look at on this thing is actually, let me get back up here to the second slide. So this cage is actually, you can lock it to the screen, and of course the screen can be locked just like any other computer. In our travels with VDI, we did not in the podium lock them down thinking, what's the use? We did have one stolen. I have no idea what that guy's going to do with it. It's a thick client. You know, good luck.
Surprise.
So we did go back through and we just cable tied them all to the podiums just like we do any other system.
They have a Kensington slot and/or you can use a sticky lock, yeah.
So.
And would you be able to give us these PowerPoints? There's a lot of information in there I'd like to have.
Yeah, I will. So you guys see my email address up there at the top? So, or come up and I'll give you a business card at the end of this. I'll be happy to email them to you.
And if you go to the Fitchburg State website under technology, we're all listed as well. So.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
What do you think of the web clients for the management consoles versus the old .NET clients?
I personally do not like them. That's just me. I've been forcing myself to use them. I've heard there's a lot of improvements in the 6 vSphere 6 web client, but I find the 5.5 kind of slow. I have to find things. Things aren't always as intuitive, and that may be just because I'm used to the .NET or the C# client, but it's a personal preference, but I am forcing myself to try to use them a bit more.
Yes, sir.
Did you have any security concerns putting faculty and staff and students on the same virtual infrastructure?
They don't actually interact. I mean, with the virtual machines, they're kind of isolated in their own sandbox as an individual VM, so it wasn't really a concern, and it's actually more secure because your PCOIP is encrypted. It's
it's 256 AES in transmission, which you don't get regular. We're an AD shop, and these things are partitioned out in pools by your security groups. So it's no different than, do you have students that get on a network, could they see a faculty member's J drive? Yeah, but that's why the security groups are there.
I'm a big VDI proponent. We have it at Wesleyan as well. There's some costs you did not mention that are significant to be aware of. It's your spinning disks or even your array at the back end, your storage. That is going to cost you based on shelf, and that can be, depending on who you go with, 6 figures. Maintenance contract and so forth.
So to give you an idea, we're looking at completely replacing our back end SAN next year because that'll be a 5-year process. And the quote so far, and again, Dell right now seems to be beating everybody, you're looking at about $100,000. When you add that in addition to the cost of what the front end costs, you're still significantly less than replacing the SAN.
No, I understand, but you're still, I want to make sure those that are looking at VDI are getting the broader picture of what they're also having to buy. You have your licensing fees for VMware or Citrix, well, Citrix for the base, but for your consoles on the other side, there are licensing fees to go on top of these things. So it's not just these are your costs, we can change out this piece of hardware for this piece of hardware. There are other back-end considerations, and make sure, for God's sakes, that your infrastructure on your network side, your switches, is up to par. If you do not, you will fail.
Yeah, they can't even play solitaire if it goes down.
You have nothing.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, 2 points. One, in terms of cost, if you look at the 10-year cost too, it really makes a big difference in favor of VDI because you can really have to refresh those things every 10 or 12 years, whereas a PC you're doing that at least 3 times, and that really adds to the price. My other question though was, I like that Samsung solution, but do you have any concerns about what if the monitor fails and how you lose zero time as well?
We looked at it, and honestly, what we based it upon was looking at our own, for flat screen, the LED monitors that you have on campus, how often do those fail? And we've had them for a number of years, and to be honest, they don't generate much heat. They seem to last for a very long time. And because that one is about $200 cheaper than what the separate solution was, we thought it was worth the risk.
I have not had any go down in production as of now, and I have about 300 out there. I did have one bad out of the box, sent it back, got a new one. So,
yes, ma'am.
Just say a few words about how this works for your remote clients. I'm thinking we're doing this on something other than the thin clients.
Yeah, so it works beautifully because if you go to a website on ours, you can actually download the client, which installs on either a Mac or a Windows system. And that gives you the ability then to run the thin client. Well, this has worked out wonderfully, to be honest with you, maternity leaves. We had a really key person in admissions go on maternity leave, and her question was, well, how can I get my desktop because I still need to work from home? That was very easy to provide because you just needed to download the client. And the nice thing about doing it that way is even though it's her home system, it's that I use a medical term, but it's that brain-blood barrier where even if our home system is completely screwed, the registry's messed up, and it's riddled with viruses, if she can run that one app, we can send a screen image to her, and there's no way she can infect us.
Can we do 3D graphics?
Oh, sure.
It's going to depend on the latency over the internet, of course. But essentially, all it's doing is sending screenshots to your client. But you can also do iPad. I did some work yesterday here on my iPad. It's not quite as convenient, and you can do it from your phones too. So
we do with the Chromebook
cool.
too. So you do SolidWorks on Chromebook. It's really $300.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Hi, great presentation. Could you talk real quickly about licensing of the apps? SolidWorks, Autodesk, and stuff?
I run licensing service for those. We have either site licenses or per seat licenses. So you do it just like your traditional desktops, where you count the machines in the labs, and you set them up with a licensing server, and they pull a license down from there.
Licensing used to be with virtual desktops much more difficult. 4 years ago, we would actually say, well, let's do a white paper for you. We'll try running it here. We'll write up a white paper so you guys understand this. Because virtual desktops are catching on, even Microsoft's gotten into the game, companies now are more willing to work with you on this. This doesn't mean you don't have some pain points, but it's worth it in the long run to go through that.
Most applications, and the licensing server is the easiest. I had one that was a little bit difficult, kind of had to put in a custom script to re-register it each time, but that was a very small software company that hadn't delved into VDI quite yet.
So we're going along here, so I'll take a couple more, and then you guys can come up. Yes, sir.
Quick question. Do you have any use cases of like dual monitors?
We do. With the P20s, I've actually used it on them. You can do it either way. So dual monitors work fine.
So when we looked at maybe using this for faculty and staff as a desktop replacement, I took at the time we had these P20s, and I would have loved to have the Samsung. You can put the P20s into extended screen mode too, and I actually ran a dual desktop system for a full year as my only computer I had, and it's just like a fast desktop. I mean, that's one key, is if you guys look at your infrastructure, if you design this thing correctly, the only thing you will end up with is something that is far faster than a regular desktop. So it's quite irritating now to get on a regular Windows 7 machine, because you wait a lot longer for it to boot, you wait a lot longer for applications to load. These are just much quicker. Yes, sir.
Windows, we don't virtualize Linux at this point. We have a back-end Linux server that students will log into from the Windows desktops through PuTTY or whatever, but we do not virtualize Linux currently, except on the server side. We do have Red Hat and a few.
VMware's coming out with Linux desktop.
Oh, you can do it.
Yeah. We haven't had the request yet. The neat thing we did on computer science is we have about 8 faculty members, and they all have 8 different compilers they like to use, 8 different programming apps that they use, and it used to be impossible to get all the lab systems to work. So instead what we did is we created 8 different desktop pools, and the students get assigned to those through a Windows security group. So when they sign up for a class, we pull that from Banner, we give them access to a security group, and when the student sits down in the lab, they can actually see the instructor's version of that desktop with just the apps that instructor runs. It makes it a lot easier for us to set up those lab systems, and it gives the student a lot less confusion because they don't see 6 different computers on there, they only see the one they're being taught on.
I do use ThinApp. I virtualize some applications. Some of them are very good use cases for that. I do a lot of the math software, MATLAB, Minitab, Maple, things like that. Some of them are not great use cases. It's not, click your finger and virtualize. Sometimes the capture can be a little tricky. You've got to pull a few switches, but overall it works very well. We are going to be looking into app volumes very soon for profile and app layering, but there's Unidesk, there's Profile Unity, there's a couple other companies out there that are doing things with it too, but currently we're using ThinApp.
How about virtualizing inside of virtualizing? Do you have students who log into VMware to create their own servers and that they have
You could do that.
Technically.
Yeah,
but you give me an aneurysm trying to troubleshoot.
I mean, I run all of my, I build
I would just keel over.
I build virtual machines from my virtual dedicated desktop. I manage, vSphere, I build servers and everything through there.
Right there. Okay.
Yep. I have done the view with the Windows virtualization inside of Windows 7. It does start to chug a little bit if you do a local virtualization, because then now you're using the virtual machine as the hypervisor, and like Steve said, that'll kind of give you an aneurysm, but
you can stream applications from within a virtual machine if that's what you want to do, because there's app
Well, right now on the
virtualization
regular desktop, they log into VMware and they have their own little space and they create all their own virtual machines for their own project. They connect the network. So right now, I would have to replicate that.
So because we're 15 minutes past, we will let everybody out of here. So thank you for your time. If you have anything, we will stick around for a little while. You can just come up and talk to us. We will not find out. Thank you.